We are back with another episode. We should have recorded that. This one might be a little rough because we started talking about this conversation this morning and we said, no, let's save it for the podcast. So coming to you a little more raw and unfiltered than perhaps some of our others, but we want to talk today about the pace of building our businesses. So Sissy and I have taken two different approaches. I kind of tried to start drinking from the fire hose right at the beginning, and it's been overwhelming. Sissy instead has, kind of piecemealed and progressed through her business development. She's added a few more key pieces this, in the last couple of days. So we just want to talk about that difference and how it has kind of shaked out in what the results we're seeing currently are. I'll give you a hint, not a lot of tangible stuff going on. So we'll just dive right into the conversation and we'll, just talk about the differences in what we've done as far as our approaches go.
Yeah, so see, I think you're right to preface this with current structure of our businesses is that neither of them have brought in profit yet. So it's not that like one is definitely like gonna make you loads of money and the other one isn't, but I think we're gonna be having this conversation more about how it feels and the overwhelmingness and the sense that a lot of times you get messaging that you have to have this and this and this and this in place to even launch. Where we're going to show some contrast today in our conversation between you following that modality and feeling like you needed to have all these pieces in place versus Stephanie's and my approach, which was really more laid back and like, well, let's just put something out there and we'll grow it as it goes.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny. We were both kind of at the same point despite our two different approaches. So it'll be kind of cool. And yeah, I think it's important for people to know we still have made diddly squat on all of this, like just to be clear. So it's, yeah, we're just coming at this, as entrepreneurs in the very early stages of trying to grow our business and looking at what we're doing and how it's panning out or not. So I know for me and my own start, I kind of thought I needed to have everything. And so I set up, I'd already had the blog. I started that, I guess, a year ago or so ish, and then didn't really do too much with it for quite a while. But I had that as my jumping off point when I was ready to start building the community. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, I need to write blog posts and I need to develop this community. And I figured I need to grow my YouTube channel because that's going to help funnel people into my community and kind of give people a chance to get to know me and my story and want to click with that. So I very quickly in this last, in fall of 2023, found myself trying to do it all. And I'd set the goal of, 22 YouTube videos by the launch. And I mean, that did not happen. I think I got like 6 up or something, 5 or 6. But I felt really divided and I felt like I had to do it all. And so, I was trying to rework the website that I'd already started. And I mean, I'm not technologically savvy. That was a big challenge and still is. And then I was, working on the YouTubes, learning how to use editing software, kind of over editing my videos. I've since pulled back on some of that just out of sheer having to get it done sort of thing. And then, I was also working on building the community, but I wanted to make sure I had a pretty inclusive e-course for people when they arrived at the community to help get folks on the right footing. And so was working on that too. And, I was sitting there in the back of my mind thinking, okay, I also need to build an email list. I need to work on my Instagram. I need to put all these posts out. I need to connect with people. Oh my goodness, it's too much. It's straight up too much. I know there are some people out there who are just super highly productive individuals and they can crush it and they make themselves a to-do list and tick those things off and they don't find themselves in that place of overwhelm, but I do. And so it has been a really big thing for me to kind of have to pull back on some of that. And then instead, I've essentially found myself having to work on things piecemeal as opposed to my earlier attempts of just, taking it all in from the jump because I get too overwhelmed and I've got to go back and do things bit by bit. And that helps, but I kind of wish I'd just done that from the beginning, except also I don't know that I would have gotten anything done if I hadn't tried to do everything. So in some ways, it's kind of that explore and exploit concept we've talked about before, where we've got to try a bunch of different things and kind of see what sticks, see what fits, see what feels good, because that's another aspect of all of this is sometimes the work and the effort, where we're putting that work and effort doesn't necessarily translate into feeling like you're growing your business. It doesn't translate into confidence that you're doing the right things. So there's, a lot of kind of taking a step back and regrouping. But it's hard to do that when you have so many things on the table at a time. And then Sissy, what about y'all? When you started with just the community, right?
Yeah, but I have some follow-up questions for
Oh,
your stuff first.
all
Because
right.
I had the same thought as you were talking of like, I remember as you were launching your business, we were talking a lot about the concept. I don't remember if it was directly from Ryan Holiday or if
Mm,
it was from someone else he had interviewed. But anyways, about the idea of setting that really, really, big, massive goal. And even if you don't meet said massive goal, at least you put forth more work than you would have otherwise. I do
mhm,
wonder if that element was a little bit at play for you because you were pedal to the metal in like August and September when
mhm,
you felt like you did have to have all of that done. I mean,
mhm,
you were grinding as far as like creating those YouTube videos and especially building out that course within your community already, like from the jump.
mhm.
Um, so I'm you did already kind of allude to this, but I'm curious to know if like you felt like that did end up being a source of motivation for you. And also, I'm curious why you felt like you had to do all of it all at once. Was it because that you felt like that was the only way to ever get traction to said community and you needed to have these certain features in the community in order for it to be attractive or for you to look like a wellness coach or what was that play there?
Yeah, those are good questions. So the first one about we kind of refer to it as failing forward, is that idea of set the big goals and try and reach for those stars, but if you don't, at least you've made progress along the way. And I do feel like that was a big part of the YouTube videos. I said like, okay, I'm gonna release, 2 YouTube videos a week. Like, whoa, guys, come on, that's a lot. At least it is for me. And so I had that idea of I'm gonna do 22 by the time I launch. But instead I got out, however many I did, and I felt good about those. That was solid. But I knew I had to kind of put more time into that e-course, and I did feel like that was really important. And maybe it's different because my community, it's animal-based eating, it's carnivore diet. There's a lot of questions. Like basically everything that we talk about in my community flies in the face of much of what we've been taught about health and nutrition growing up. That fat is actually good for you and that you can eat a lot of red meat and you're not going to die of colon cancer. There's a lot of dispelling of myths and misinformation. And so I feel like for me in this health field, I did need that it was not an optional thing because otherwise I would have too many people coming into the community looking for answers, unable to find them. And then maybe it would end up in a chaotic, spiral of people saying, oh, well, this is what carnivore is, or, oh, you need to do this or that. And I see that elsewhere on the internet and it is not helpful. And it is kind of, it can serve to people's detriment in that they don't get the right information from the start. And so I wanted to avoid that. And I felt that was really important for creating a community that has value and that is reliable. So I did feel like I had to do that. And maybe that would be different for someone not in that space. Y'all in your writers community don't necessarily need an e-course on how to write. Like we've all learned how to write and the mechanics have remained the same for, eons. So we're good in that department. But for me, I really felt like I need this e-course to kind of bring everyone on the same page and to have to refer to so that when folks come in with questions, it's not taking up my personal time. Oh yeah, you can eat this and this, and you can do this and this, and this is something to be mindful of. Instead, all that information is there, and I think it serves as a really good guide for people on getting started. But in trying to, do everything, there was a it was motivating in and of itself because I always had something I could work on. Like if I didn't want to work on the e-course, I could work on editing a video. If I didn't want to work on editing a video, then I could work on creating some of the branding stuff and, logos or, headers, thumbnails, things like that to use throughout my community and my social media stuff. So it was kind of nice in a way because I had different avenues to put different forms of energy into. And I think that helped me kind of keep up the motivation. There was always something kind of fun to work on, depending on my mood and creativity level. So that was actually nice. Trying to think, did I cover all your questions? Do you think that
Yeah, but I
rounded
have
out?
one more. So I remember that when you set those plans of what you wanted at the beginning, you had also scheduled your launch to be January. And
Oh,
then you made that decision. I know, look at that realization. She just mouthed, I
hilarious.
did. Um, then at some point you made that decision to launch in October. What was it that made you let go of not having had all those pieces fully in place and feeling like you had enough of it in place to launch?
Mm, that's a really good question. I don't know that I fully know the answer, but I think it's so funny you reminded me of that. Yeah, the original plan was to get the community up and running and ready for January launch to kind of coincide with everyone's New Year's resolutions. But yeah, I was ready to go mid October. Yeah. And I I wonder what it was. I did have a couple people in my ear. One in particular, she was kind of checking in with me. Hey, what are you working on? She was kind of pushing me. Hey, I know these health coaches, like these carnivore coaches, you could reach out to them. She was definitely trying to do a little networking on my behalf, which I very much appreciated. But it was kind of weird that I felt like I was sitting on my own information of what I wanted to do, and that I wasn't being as authentic, as truthful in those conversations as I'd prefer to be. And then I had I realized that the e-course was coming together faster than I expected.
Mhm.
And I felt like I had enough of the YouTube videos, created, edited, and uploaded that, the bones of my story are out there so that if people want to get to know me, they actually have a good foundation. They can watch these videos and kind of get a feel for who I am and what I've been through and what I might bring to the table in these carnivore discussions. And so I kind of felt like I've got enough. I can either keep sitting on it and holding back, or I can just do the damn thing, which is kind of what I decided to do. It's like you can talk about it or you can be about it. And I was at the point where I was ready to be about it. And, that's one of the little phrases I say to myself all the time to, light a little fire under my keister. And it helped to just do it. I had the pieces in place. And when I sat back and looked, it's like, okay, so what am I actually waiting on? What metrics are holding me back? Is it the fact that I don't yet have the payment plans in place? Like that was one of them, but I knew I was going to start off with a free launch anyways. I had time to create the payment plans. Was it that, I felt like, the new year is the best time? Well, yeah, it is, but if I'm giving this, service away for free, let me gift it in the form of like holiday gifting, kind of market it as the holidays are really hard. Like, and they are, trust me, for anyone who's tried to maintain a diet throughout the holiday season, you can attest to that. So I kind of just talked myself back into it and wanted to go ahead and launch so that I could just get my bearings. I mean, I think I also realized at a certain point that you've got to just do it and figure it out along the way. Like it is never going to be perfect. And if you keep waiting for things to be absolutely perfect, you'll never do it. And I think perhaps maybe you saw some of that, that shift and you're like, we're just going to launch. Like we're going to launch in 2 weeks. I mean, y'all's turnaround time was so fast. I was really impressed by that.
Yeah, and that was not even on me. Stephanie just said, "Hey, I think we should launch, December 5th or whatever."
Mhm.
So the way our timeline sort of worked out is I didn't even propose the idea of us joining forces and making a community until like early October, like 5th, 6th, something around there. I was just having a regular like FaceTime catch up session with Stephanie because she was in Missouri with her kids and I was in Colorado and we hadn't talked in a bit. So we were just catching up as friends. And I knew we both had this like long-term vision of the community. Um, and then I just got this wild hair where I was like, hey, do you want to do that together? And she was like, yeah. Once I get back from Nepal, like, let's do that. Cause she was traveling for 2 weeks at the end of October. So we had set like a time for early November to start thinking about this community. So in the meantime, our assignments were to like brainstorm names for it and that sort of thing, right? And I was already familiar with Mighty Networks because you were launching your community.
Mhm.
And Stephanie had also been a part of a previous I think Mighty Networks based community, and if not Mighty Networks, then another similar like structure of subscription based kind of community, right? Where there's chats and meetings and course content and that same sort of like business model
Mhm.
for entrepreneurs that she had been a part of. And so we met together in like early November at the coffee shop when she was back from her travels. And that's when we picked the name
Mhm.
and started the like, I think at that point, just an Instagram account
Mhm.
and started the Mighty Networks. She had done the Mighty Networks has like that 2-week trial period of like the business like version where you can like build out your site, but then you kind of lose your site if you don't like go ahead and pay.
Mhm.
So at that point, we were paying for like the business site, and that was like the end of November. And so she was like, yeah, December 5th, let's go live. And I'm like, okay. I mean,
Yeah,
we
you told
literally,
me and I thought that was so wild. I was like, "Wait, what y'all just, formulated this idea." It was fast.
we were still very much in the like brainstorming phase of like, okay, we think we want these kind of elements. We think we want these kind of meetings.
Mhm.
I mean, and then we launched with like our baseline meeting, which is basically the time to write meeting where we come together. There's some inspiration, there's some accountability writing where everyone writes their own stuff, and then we come together to talk about wins or feedback. And that's essentially where we started. I quickly had our office assistant, aka ChatGPT, help me construct some little mini courses. They aren't really even courses. They were just handouts on like how to organize your writing space, how to, just so there would be some content there, but it was
Mhm.
not anything that I put more than, I don't know, an hour's worth of time into each, as far
Mhm.
as like having just some references of the types of things that we knew we wanted to have available, like how to use the Pomodoro method, or see, there was one other. Oh, and then I had the community guidelines written up and stuff like that. Like it was super basic.
Mhm.
But we also knew that because we didn't have a list to launch to, that it was
Mhm.
gonna be a slow launch anyways.
Right.
Like we weren't so concerned about making a good first impression because we knew that like most people would not find us for a while and we would have time to build out the stuff that we needed to build out. So we've
Mhm.
changed our like landing page for like the community 3 times already, because since we launched in December and now it's like almost exactly 2 months later, we have gone through so many iterations of adding new things and redesigning what it looks like and kind of removing the features or not yet talking about the features that aren't in place yet because they're still a little ways out. And yeah, we really have done it bit by bit. By the end of December, we were brainstorming the book club. So
Mhm.
that was something that we launched in January.
Mhm.
For the February new thing, that's been a new type of meeting that we have once a week. And since then we've added TikTok. And it wasn't until I think mid-December, maybe early December, that we started doing the podcast. But that was not a part of the original like business plan. When we said we're doing this community, we did not have the idea of the podcast yet, but we knew we wanted to record some videos so that people could quickly at their own time find out what our current writing projects were, what our community was about. And so we had recorded those videos and put them on YouTube. And so the podcast sort of snowballed from there, as
Mhm.
far as it being like a YouTube video thing. And then we were like, we had a friend who had also started a podcast that we were networking with, and she helped us see how easy it would be to get it out to, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and knowing that that would be probably our largest marketing arm, our most successful one,
Mhm.
um, and one that we just enjoy doing because podcasting is a lot of fun
Mhm.
versus making like social media posts.
Mhm.
That was sort of a natural direction for us to lean into.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd totally forgotten that the podcast was never a part of the original plan.
No.
So, and how different was that? Like in being able to launch the community and focus on the community and the style of meetings that you had available from the jump to then, adding in the podcast later as you kind of felt like, oh, you know what, we're actually already meeting during this time. The YouTube videos are easier to create when we just chat anyways.
Mhm.
It that's got to have made such a difference in the way that you kind of stepped into it without even realizing that that's what you'd done.
Exactly. And if Stephanie had presented me with like the business plan as it looks right now, I would have been like, breaks, breaks, breaks. I don't have the capacity for that. I don't know what that looks like. Because I was also transitioning in my life as being, that stay at home parent, and now suddenly carving out time in my day to write my book, to attend these meetings, and to do all the business background stuff. I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, it wasn't even until maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that I started working consistently 5, 6 hours a day on the business. I was able to do about 3 hours a day usually.
Mhm.
Now I've added a lot more as we've grown, but the beautiful thing about that, about allowing the growth to happen a little bit more naturally, is it's really kept the stress levels down, and we've
Mhm.
only bitten off what we already have capacity or room to chew.
Mhm.
So that dictated how often we record and how long our episodes are. Like instead of having to mold our life around our business plans,
Mhm.
it's gone the opposite way, where we've taken our life, we've taken our time, we've taken our availability, our interests and skills, and we've figured out what parts of the business model fit well into that. And so
Mhm.
I really believe that that is probably the most sustainable way to grow the
Mhm.
business, because you just don't have to struggle through finding room for that.
Yeah.
And we have said from the beginning that with the community, we knew we were comfortable with it being more minimalistic in the beginning,
Mhm.
because we wanted to put into place the aspects that people really want. We want those in our community to feel like, especially those early on, our founding members, to feel like they have a say in what the community looks like,
Mhm.
and we want to use their ideas for the inspiration of what to create. I mean, and to some degree, Stephanie and I create the things that we enjoy too. That's why
Mhm.
we have the time to write sessions. That's why we added the book club for reading like a writer, because we know that those will help our own writing experiences and reaching our own writing goals. So then we extrapolate that to being, well, if there are other people like us, then they will
Mhm.
also resonate with these features,
Mhm.
but also not adding things that aren't, that there's no one yet to do. So we had these ideas of having critique groups, and those would be really helpful for our writing. We
Yeah.
just don't have enough people yet in order to take the time to build in that structure and what that's going to look like, you
Mhm.
know? And so we will build it when they come.
Right? Right.
And until then, we added the weekly roundtable, which is a more casual version of, yeah, you can share something you're struggling with. You could share a small excerpt, but it's not like a full-fledged critique group.
Mhm.
And we just yesterday got our domain name for our website. Before that, we just had the Mighty Networks website, and our podcast has its own, Buzzsprout devoted website.
Mhm.
We had the YouTube channel, we had the Instagram. And
Mhm.
so now we're going to be consolidating that all under our own business website with our domain name, which will be a nice place for us to park some of the other things we want to have, not
Mhm.
just to have the community and the podcast kind of all in one space where people can find us, but also Stephanie's getting ready to open up her one-on-one coaching.
Mm.
I'm going to be launching a memoir course that will be available within the community, but I'm also going to sell it as a separate feature for those that just want a,
Mhm.
downloadable access course.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really wise. And I love that y'all have done it this way because you've now got the website. But can you imagine what it would have felt like if you were trying to figure out how to do the Mighty Networks platform, how to do the podcasting and, disseminating that to all the various, podcasting hosts, and trying to pull together a website that you then have to go put all these pieces, into place to make it accessible and, aesthetically pleasing. Like, I'm very envious of you, I'm sitting here, I'm like, "Oh my god," like, my website is embarrassing, it's a hot mess, like, I know I need to go tend to it and stuff, but because you've gone slowly, you focused on one thing at a time, you've really been able to nail down each one and be very clear on what that looks like in that space. Your podcast is very clear, your community is very clear, and now I feel like your website, as you develop that out, is going to also have that clarity, and it's gonna really beautifully tie everything in together for y'all. But yeah, instead of drinking from the fire hose, you've just been over there like sipping as needed, and like here you go, you're totally like low key, no stress, which is a beautiful thing and enviable, I will add. So yeah, quite a difference. And then I'm curious, in where you are now, and I know you still have places you want to build out, but like how do these little steps then guide your next decision in the decision-making process of where to build the business?
Well, it gives us that time to see what's working and what's not working. So we started our time to write meetings. We've had 4 for the month or
Mhm.
for the week. We added a 5th time that did not increase traction. We didn't increase attendance because of that particular time. So then we are able to make those adjustments. I think it gives you time, and there's like that added efficiency of like not creating so much that you ultimately end up having to like tear back down again.
Mhm.
It makes me think of how you ended up re-recording some of your YouTube videos, some of those early ones that you made when you
Mhm.
realized that it wasn't conveying the same like tone that you wanted to have
Mhm.
with some hindsight. Luckily, you only had a handful of those up, but if you had recorded all 22, would they all have had
Right.
that same kind of like connotation or that preachy feel that you were worried about?
Mhm.
Like, it
Such a
just
good
gives
point.
you time to adjust. It gives you time to acclimate. And I said this earlier, but like I really needed time in my own life given the massive transition because just for listeners, for context, my divorce wasn't finalized until mid-October. And
Mhm.
then now, as of this last weekend, I just moved to this new place. You'll see this beautiful new devoted
Wonderful.
office space I have.
Mhm.
So like my life has been and still on the hopefully final tail ends of massive change and transition. What you found to be motivating by taking on that like the big task of launching the way you wanted to with all those different features, I would have found totally crippling. I needed it to feel manageable and doable in order
Mhm.
to not give up. And even during some of that, even with the bite-sized way that Stephanie and I did it, there
Mhm.
were moments that were so over my head as far as like the podcast editing side and whatnot that like luckily Stephanie has a much more diverse skill set than I do, and she's also been in the online business coaching space longer than I have. I had a financial coaching business before, but it was essentially a blog and one-on-one coaching and a very basic website to support the blog. And I used my personal like Facebook. I think I made a Facebook group and like
Mhm.
that was it. So she knows all about the email lists and so she's got the ConvertKit thing. So when people give us their email address, they get the free thing, but then they also get these blurbs,
Mhm.
once a day or a couple times a week. And that's
Mhm.
all Stephanie. So that's the other piece about growing slow is we've been really able to cater to each other's skill sets as
Mhm.
well. So
Mhm.
in the way that I've sort of pushed our business forward has been in adding guests to our podcast.
Mhm.
The same friend who was already doing podcasting that helped us sort of launch into that realm also pointed us to the podcast collaborative, which is basically a networking group between fellow podcast hosts and potential guests.
Mhm.
And I've been the one to mainly explore that avenue as far as getting guests and how we want to screen guests and setting up our calendar so that we can have these like 15-minute sort of just casual chats to get a feel for what this potential guest may bring, and working on using the software that we have access to called Squadcast, and figuring out how that works. So that's been where I've been pushing the business forward, while Stephanie has been working on the email stuff.
Mhm.
And she will probably be the one doing our website design because she uses the same Squarespace for her other business.
Mhm.
So she's very familiar with the template. So it's less of a learning curve for her.
Yeah, that's amazing because yeah, the learning curve on all this stuff, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. So I love that you have her and that y'all's skill sets divide so beautifully. You know, she's really good at like the back end, the admin stuff, getting the copy. And I think she's the one who's, updated y'all's landing page so many times and,
I
with
did
the
the last
iteration.
update, but she
Mhm.
usually does the initial like build and then teaches me how to use the technology because I get so frustrated with the technology, and she just is fine, like fiddling around and just playing with it and learning by just trying. And I think it's because I really like value efficiency and I hate feeling inefficient, that
Mhm.
I don't want to fiddle around with it. I want someone to show me how to do it. So I'm the kind of person, I go out and I seek the tutorials or things like that.
Yeah.
And I've also handled some of the back end business, like financial stuff. Like I keep our financial records and stuff up to date each month. And,
Mhm.
so yeah, it's a divide and conquer for sure.
Yeah, y'all have done so well in balancing one another. And I love that y'all have weekly business meetings. And I think that's something that, as someone working by myself, I kind of feel like I don't have to do that. At no point in my week do I have a time where I sit down and say, this is what I'm working on this week. Should I do that? Heck yes, I should. And I probably need to start doing it like as soon as we get off of this podcast or recording, because I need that same accountability, even though it's just me. Whereas you and Stephanie have built in that time where you have this weekly meeting, we have our meeting, we have, we've set our goals for what we're going to focus on. And it gives you clarity so that when you go and sit down, you're able to tackle these things bit by bit in a very digestible manner. And I
It
think
is
that's
a
been a huge part of your
list
success.
with specific tasks. And if they're
Mhm.
assigned to a particular person, then we write the name. But otherwise, we just go in our Google Docs and we'll edit, completed, scheduled, whatever. So it's like anytime I sit down at the computer and I'm like, what am I going to work on today? I pull up the list because that'll tell me what I'm working on.
Mhm.
Also, in those meetings, we assess what's working and what's not working. So if
Mhm.
we don't feel like we're reaching people, that's when I pursued some tutorial about how to make our Instagram posts and reels and stories more engaging,
Mhm.
because that didn't feel like it was working. Or making some tweaks to our email list or our link tree to make the links a little bit more appealing to let people know what they're really like signing up for,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. We also take time to highlight our wins. So I have a like Excel spreadsheet that has our wins on it and I date them. So like the one to add for this week, one of the main ones would be that we published our 10th podcast episode this week.
Mhm. I saw that on your
Um,
Instagram. That was great.
yeah, so it's like the wins are helpful just for us to see our own progress, even like we said, even though no one's paying us to do any of this yet, we
Right.
have to keep motivated and we have to see these wins, but
Mhm.
also they can turn into content, right? Like you said, you saw it on Instagram.
Right.
So, it goes all of those different ways.
Mhm. Yeah, I think y'all have been able to really keep up with everything nicely as you've gone. And that I do think it comes down to having built out things little by little as opposed to trying to do it all at once. Um, yeah, I kind of wish I had done that a bit more. Um,
You
but
ultimately did, that just wasn't your vision in the beginning.
right. Well, and I think that's worth like expounding on just a bit is that, I had this idea that I needed to do the YouTube, I needed to do the blog posts on my website, I need to do this. Guess what? Like the way that it's actually shaken out is my focus has gone back to the community and maintaining those meetings that I've had. And only once that felt stable was I able to then, okay, let's increase the presence on Instagram and Instagram posts. And then once I felt kind of good about how that was going, then I turned back to recreating creating YouTube videos and getting those up, edited and uploaded. So I threw everything out there and then I had to prune it back for a little bit. And now I'm able to like see growth in those areas. But it's not like I've just been over here scrambling, doing everything the whole time. I tried that at first and I was able to sustain it for about, 2 months or so. And then it kind of came grinding to a halt. The universe was like, this is too much. You can't do it all. You've got 2 young kids. You've got a family and a household to run. It's not happening. And so I've had to dial it back. And then now, as I build it out, now I'm approaching it in a more sustainable way, I think, and hope. But it definitely still needs some refinement. I would benefit from having a business intention meeting every week, even if it's just myself. And yeah, this is a good conversation. I feel like I needed this conversation more than you did, Sissy. So once again, like consulting fees coming your way in the future. But yeah, it's tough to try and do it all at once. It's basically impossible. And people who tell you you can do it all at once, well, they just have way more free time.
Yeah, or maybe they understand the baseline of the technology better because of their previous work. Like if you're coming from marketing, then maybe it's not a big deal for you to like put together a quick e-course and, do some Instagram posts or whatever. It really just depends on like your background, right? There was something else I wanted to say. Oh, I wanted to ask you, what do you see as your next little bites? Like, I know you're building out the YouTube more. Are you looking to do like interviews with people with that? Or what do
Uh,
you kind of see down the road as like when there's more free time, once these things stabilize again, what do you want to do next?
Oh, so even that kind of feels like I've got too many things. I've got too many irons in the fire, even in what I hope to do, which maybe I need to learn from that first lesson of not trying to do everything. So I am seeing some traction with the YouTube videos I've been putting out. I've been getting some great comments, great feedback. Oh, this is, a great video on this topic. I really appreciate this. Thank you. This is so helpful. And then I'm also steadily getting new subscribers, which is really great too. So I do feel like the YouTube needs continued effort. And I do really feel like that's where my people are because of my topic. You can't Google like a carnivore diet. There's a few people who have, well-established blogs and stuff. But honestly, if you're looking for information, you're doing it on YouTube. And so that's where I know I need to go. That's where my people are. So I know I need to keep doing that. But I also don't love sitting here making a video of me talking and this is my experience. I mean, it's a little weird and phony and I try to like push the authenticity part, but it's still weird. So I do feel like I need to collaborate with other people. I do not at this point have the skill set to invite people on and be the host. I don't. And I recognize that about myself. So I am not going to be the person who is looking to have people on as a guest yet. That's more like, maybe in 6 months from now, I would like to be at that point. But for right now, I need to try to get on other people's shows, the other people who have already figured out how to streamline the process of having guests on and whatnot. I want to be on theirs. So I'm taking a page out of your book, Sissy, and I'm going to join the podcast collaborative. I do have that written into my budget for the next 6 months, like the little $15 membership, so that I can then go and try and be on other people's shows and other people's, be interviewed by others so that I can hopefully reach a broader audience. I think a lot of the people who are finding my stuff, they're already carnivore. They're already interested in it, at least. But I would like to go grab those people who haven't yet heard that this is something that can revolutionize their lives and see if I can bring them in, and if I can be one of their first touch points, then my community will have, I think, more value in their eyes moving forward. So I think it's in the YouTubes. I do think it's in doing interviews and conversations with other people, but I recognize that I don't have that bandwidth yet to be the person hosting it on my end. And then also I need to be able to do more sharing of my own story and day-to-day life on Instagram, which I hate, guys, y'all, I hate this. The obstacle is the way. I just always have to remember this. As soon as I read that book, Ryan Holiday, back in the day, before I even, figured out that carnivore was the thing for me, I knew I wanted to develop an online business. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to work for myself. And I just knew social media, man, I don't want to do it, but the obstacle's the way. And I got to figure out how to do it. I got to lean in. It's easier for me when I stay consistent with it, but when I fall off, I suddenly feel like I've got to go back. It's like getting used to a cold pool, right? Like if you just dive right in and you stay in the water and you keep moving, you're fine. But if you keep getting out of the water and drying off, it's gonna be so cold every time you get back in. So that's where I am. I need to stay in the pool and keep treading water. I just keep reaching for the ladder and climbing out. So those are my two areas. It's the social media, it's YouTube, and it's Instagram, and story sharing and being more of me in my life, not just like cutesy little food stuff here and there. What about
I think
you?
that's super wise to both identify where your audience is or is coming from, and also your own capacity, like that just reality check of, I'm not at the point where I'm ready to be the host for other people, but I recognize that my skill set, as far as being able to be authentic and share my story, is much better through conversation versus me just recording something. So I do want to turn these more into conversations where I won't feel as awkward about talking about myself or sharing my background.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie and I have had a similar approach. This goes back, I think, well to the explore and exploit piece.
Mm-hmm.
What we have noticed in our short amount of time is that our Instagram posts about the podcasts
Mm-hmm.
get better attention and traction, and also just remove that salesiness
Mm-hmm.
of and our own insecurities about promoting the community directly.
Mm-hmm.
So we've created this pipeline, at least as we see it, of if we use our Instagram, our social media to direct people to the podcast, the
Mm-hmm.
podcast conversations will sell the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't need to sell the community within our Instagram, or at least not like super heavily.
Mm-hmm.
If we have our Instagram for the week basically line up with what we just talked about on the podcast, then we already sort of have built-in content of what we can put a little quick post of or story about or reel. And then let the podcast do that work of showing the benefit of the community. Same with our email list. Having our email list then promote the podcast so that, again, people are getting a feel for Stephanie and I as individuals, as writers. And if they resonate with us, then they'll like our community. And
Mm-hmm.
it's helped us sort of remove that self-imposed pressure to try to convert people straight from looking at a reel on Instagram to the community. That's a big
Yeah,
jump.
it's not going to
But
happen most
if
days.
we can, again, bite size, piecemeal it, take them from Instagram to the podcast. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
we can get them to like follow the podcast so they get automatic downloads, then maybe eventually they'll hear a certain story or topic that they're like, oh, I would like a book club like that. Maybe I'll just come in under the book club only membership where I'm
Mm-hmm.
not committing to the larger community, but I still get to participate in the book club meetings and the workbook and guide and the conversations surrounding the book of the month. And then
Mm-hmm.
we, bring people in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It it's just taking that pressure off of like going like 0 to 100, right? It's like creating that pipeline of how people will find you.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, it filters down, but then at least maybe you get more Instagram followers
Mm-hmm.
because they're willing to buy in at that level,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Right.
then you get podcast followers and regular listeners, and then maybe you get community members. So
Right.
we've refined our approach because up until maybe almost honestly probably a week ago, I think we discussed this at our last weekly meeting.
Mm-hmm.
The focus was definitely more on like also promoting the features of the community and the how the time to write sessions work and whatnot. And while it's nice to have that information out there, it's already in the podcast. And we talk about it pretty regularly about the progress that Stephanie and I are seeing individually with our writing because of belonging to community. And we are always talking about the value of having a community as a writer. So that's another way that the bite-size approach feels less overwhelming, feels more authentic, and just more manageable.
Very wise. Like that right there, that's the gold of this podcast, or of this episode, is just, there's so much pressure to get the funnel right, and we've talked about this before. It takes, 30 plus interactions before somebody is willing to make a purchase of whatever product it is you're offering, in this case, community. And you're right, you're not going and trying to cold call on your reels to Instagram to people who've never even followed you before. That is just like, don't put your energy there. It's not going to happen. So instead, back it up, like try and bring people in, get them following you on Instagram first. And then, as the things you're showing on Instagram, take them over to the podcast. I love that. And, I think that's kind of what I've seen a little bit of with the YouTube videos is I'm getting people joining my community. I haven't really been promoting it on Instagram lately, even though I should probably do that, but I haven't, but they're coming from YouTube, and so they're not paying yet, but they're joining the community. So it's just like upping that level of interaction with them so that at some point, perhaps they decide that this is something they want to do. But yeah, it's making it just smaller, easier, just like gently guide them in instead of trying to yank them in out of the cold. It's a much better method. So I love that. I think it's such good advice. And you're absolutely right. It kind of reframes your mindset around what you have to do to be showing up in these spaces in the way that you're supposed to as an entrepreneur trying to promote your business, because that part, like, that feels a little weird. I've never done this before. I don't know how to show up in these spaces. So, we're kind of just looking around to see what everybody else is doing, but sometimes the way they're doing it is a little too pushy, or, it's not for me. And so one person comes to mind. I've been following her Instagram the last, I don't know, a couple weeks, but I see a lot of her stuff and it's good. And she's got a strong business model. It's working for her, but it's not vibing with me personally. So it's like, even just being able to make sure that you're showing up the way that you want to in those spaces, and you're not just blanketly following what other people are doing. I think that's kind of key too.
And you're curating each space, right? So there will be an enhanced experience that people will have when they come in the community. But that's because those people have said that they're interested in that level, right? And then the podcast is sort of a step back from that. There's still, and also, side note, because we don't have a free portion of our community anymore, the podcast is our outward facing free content.
Right.
And as we've, developed what we feel like is sufficient, information, helpful value, accessibility, because of the 10 episodes of the podcast that we have out, that's what made us comfortable pulling away the free option from the community. Because frankly, it was just, chats and links to the podcast episodes and some of those basic writing resources. So instead of having that and having people get stuck there because there wasn't much pushing people to go from this free space to the paid space within the community, we've removed that, and essentially the podcast is our version of free community. So there's still that community vibe. Sure, we don't get to talk directly out, other than the comments or whatever, but that's where we show people what the community looks like. And then, Instagram is a totally different feel than even the podcast. So it's like getting people to just buy in a little at a time, just a little bit more. But I get what you're saying, Sissy. I've seen the same sort of, what I would say is more pushy than I ever want to be, with some of the people and business people I see on Instagram and the reels that pop up for me. And yeah, it doesn't suit my personal approach. And ultimately, I know you and I both want to attract people that really resonate with us as individuals, with the message that we're trying to provide, with our style. where, you know, you're focusing a lot in your carnivore community as opposed to other carnivore communities on that personal development side, on that habit forming side. You're really there for the beginner who needs a lot more hand holding than
Mhm.
some of the other communities that are available where it is a little bit more drinking from a fire hose. And
Mhm.
you're in there with people who have been doing it for 5 years and whatever and know all the rules, and you feel like a newbie,
Right.
right?
Right.
And in the writing community, ours stands out from others because we don't just have all this recorded content from published authors where you don't actually get to interact with them. It's all about support. And Stephanie and I are not telling people how they need to structure their book or write their novel. I mean, we can, that's what one-on-one coaching is for, but the
Mhm.
community itself is not that. And then the
Mhm.
community becomes the funnel for the one-on-one coaching if people want that. But
Right.
it's all like that stepping stone.
Mhm. Agreed. Agreed. And it comes down to being able to create those stepping stones, but you've got to do it in a sustainable way. And so maybe that's trying to take on everything all at once, doing a little here, a little there. Maybe it's instead the way you've done it, you know, just like build things out in the business piecemeal by piecemeal, giving you clarity as you move forward. I think that's probably the one. But I think we'll get there either way. And again, just it'll take time. It's going to take time in all these spaces.
Right, and the core message is just don't stop yourself from launching just because you don't have quote unquote all the pieces in place yet. It
Right.
it doesn't matter. It
Hmm.
really doesn't matter. People are gonna find you regardless. They're gonna look at what you have available. You're gonna have time to build all that stuff out. If you start attracting a lot of people and you need to build something up, okay, great. Now you know at least your time is worth it to build out those pieces, you know? If for example, Sissy, if you had a bunch of people coming into your community and they're like, what's carnivore? Clearly you could have thrown that course within
Right.
a few weeks like you did. You
Mhm.
know, it's nice that it's already there, but I don't think it was holding you back to not have it there
Mm-mm.
either.
No. No, and I have created, articles and stuff for the community kind of based around the questions I'm getting from people coming in. And so, instead of me trying to predict what everyone is going to need, I'm kind of using that feedback as I go to then provide that information. So it's, yeah, you just let it grow. It's a community. Like that's the beautiful thing. We are not the product. We are just helping shape and cultivate those spaces for others.
Right, we're paying attention to what people need, what people want, what has value to them, and doing our best to
Mhm.
deliver that. Well, I'm so glad that we recorded this one. I hope it helps anyone out there who is struggling with where to start or what pieces are important to have. And if you want to hear more stuff like this, please like this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and comment. We'd love to hear, what you're struggling with, what you want to know more about.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
Till
great.
next time, Sissy.
See ya.